I'm Evelyn Hawthorne, 72 years old, and I never imagined my daughter would throw a birthday party so extravagant that it made my own home feel unfamiliar. By the end of the night, she stood at the center of the ballroom, surrounded by her guests, smiling at them like royalty. And when she walked over with a leather folder in hand, I knew something was coming, but I didn't expect her to speak so loudly or so sweetly. She asked me to sign over my home, right there in front of everyone. And before I could answer, she smashed her own birthday cake into my face before I go any further. Let me know where you're listening from and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever been blindsided by someone you love. The house had always been quiet since Robert passed. Not hollow, just still. It was the kind of stillness that settled around bookshelves and creaking floors and long walks through the garden with a sweater on my shoulders. I'd kept everything the way it was, not because I couldn't move on, but because there was something steady about routine, something safe. We built this house together. He and I, every beam and window was chosen carefully. The sunroom added after Lily was born, the library for our winters and Sunday afternoons. He called it our anchor. And when he died 10 years ago, I didn't sell or downsize. I stayed because it felt right, because I thought Lily would one day understand what this place meant. I raised her with every kindness I had learned from my own mother. Simple things like thank you notes and telling the truth even when it hurt I believed in. Birthdays with homemade cakes, and teaching her to see value in people. Not things. I was never wealthy, growing up, but when Robert and I started his contracting business, and it did well, I never let money change the rhythm of how we lived. But Lily saw things differently, even as a teenager. She had tastes that didn't come from me, the kind that leaned toward brands and gold labels. She married young to a man named Brent. And that's when the shift began. Suddenly, our family dinners became rare, and the visits came only when they needed something. She'd talk about real estate markets and investment portfolios in the same breath as family vacations. And I would just nod and listen when she asked to host her 35th birthday at the house. I didn't say no. The ballroom hadn't seen guests in years. And I thought maybe it would be nice to hear music echo through those halls again. I helped where I could, but mostly I stayed out of the way. She had a planner and caterers and photographers. It was clear from the start that this wasn't a family celebration. It was a performance. I stood near the dessert table watching her laugh under the chandelier light, her friends clapping as someone made a toast. She looked beautiful, polished, graceful, but not familiar anymore. Then she came toward me, folder in hand, voice sweet as honey, and loud enough for half the room to hear. "Everyone's here," she said. "Why not make it official? Let's sign the deed." I held my champagne glass tighter, the cold pressing against my fingers. This wasn't how Robert and I imagined this going. Not like this, not in front of strangers. I told her it wasn't the time. She pushed back, said Daniel. "Thought we should settle things now before I got too old to manage it all." I barely noticed the room going quiet until the cake hit my face, cold and heavy. The frosting dripping down my collar. Lily's voice sharp enough to cut, "You selfish old woman. This house should already be mine." Phones were out, people watching. No one stepped in, not even Brent. He stood behind her like a statue, one hand on her shoulder, like this was planned. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I wiped my face with a linen napkin and looked at her calmly. "If you believe you're owed something that isn't yours, you'll get exactly what you deserve." And then I walked away, my heels echoing on the marble floor as I left the ballroom and stepped into the quiet halls where Robert's portrait still hung steady and unblinking. The door to my study clicked shut behind me, and I stood there in the silence, breathing in the old, familiar scent of cedar and paper. I wasn't shaken, not in the way they expected, but something had changed. Something final. The fireplace crackled quietly as I wiped the frosting from my cheek and sat down in the old armchair. The night went on without me. More music, more laughter, but I knew the real conversation had already begun. The sunroom was already warm when she arrived. Lily stood just outside the open door, dressed in a soft pink blouse. No jewelry, her hair tucked back like she'd tried to look casual on purpose. I'd already set the table, 2 cups pot of tea, steeped napkins folded. She hesitated in the doorway, then stepped inside, heels quiet on the tile. "Mother," she said softly, "can we talk?" I motioned to the wicker chair across from me. She sat, crossed her legs, and offered a practiced pause, the kind she used when preparing a pitch. Then she began. "I wanted to apologize for last night," she said. Her voice shook slightly, just enough to sound sincere. It got out of hand. I didn't mean for it to go so far. I reached for my tea and sipped without answering. The silence settled between us. "You have to understand." She continued, her tone slipping into something gentler, more rehearsed. "We're just concerned. About you, about your health, about how much you've had to handle alone." She reached for my hand across the table. I let her take it, though I felt the urge to pull away. "You've always been strong, but maybe it's time to let someone help. You shouldn't have to carry this all by yourself." I nodded slightly. "And what kind of help did you have in mind?" Her smile returned, tight, controlled. "Brent and I have been speaking with a few professionals, financial advisors, estate planners. They've offered to help us structure things so you don't have to worry about anything anymore. We'd manage everything. The paperwork, the house. You could just focus on living your life, resting, traveling even." She spoke as if she was doing me a favor, as if I hadn't managed this estate alone for the better part of a decade. I set my cup down gently. "That's very thoughtful of you, dear." Relief flickered across her face. She thought I was softening. "But I've handled this house for over 40 years, I continued. "I think I can manage it a little longer." Her shoulders stiffened. She pressed on anyway. "We're only thinking long term," she said. "Brent knows people who can simplify things, make it all easier." I smiled at her. "I appreciate your concern." She blinked, unsure of where the conversation was headed. "Why don't we talk more about it later?" I said, my tone light. "Not today. I need some fresh air." I stood and left her sitting there, still holding her tea, her performance unfinished. It was nearly noon when I passed the hallway near the downstairs office. I'd been looking for an old gardening book I'd left in the library, but stopped when I heard voices drifting up through the cracked door. "She's more stubborn than I thought," Lily whispered. Daniel's voice followed sharper. "That's why we need Dr. Stanford involved. If she's declared mentally unfit, we don't need her signature. No more delays. It'll be clean." My hand rested lightly against the wall, just enough to keep my balance. I stayed still quiet. "And he's willing?" Lily asked. "Of course he is," Daniel said. "We've been paying that clinic long enough. He'll write what we need." There was a pause, then Daniel's low chuckle. "The sooner we get that deed, the sooner we sell. With the market right now, we could clear $2 million by year's end. That wipes out my debts completely." Lily's voice dropped to a near whisper. "And Mother won't have to worry anymore. Once she's declared incompetent, the court assigns us everything. We'll move her into that care facility in Virginia. She'll be comfortable." I stayed frozen in place, hand steady against the molding, the wood grain cool under my fingertips. Daniel continued. "We need the paperwork ready before she changes her mind again. Keep her thinking we're helping until it's all done." "She still thinks I care," Lily said quietly. "I can handle her." I stepped back slowly, heel first, careful not to let the floor creak. I didn't breathe until I'd returned to the far end of the hallway. I closed the door to my study behind me and sat at my desk, palms flat against the surface. They thought I was too old to fight, too polite to push back. They were wrong. The next morning, I reached for the old rotary phone by my nightstand. I hadn't spoken to Martha in months, but I didn't hesitate. Her voice came on the second ring just as clear and composed as always. "Evelyn. My word, it's been too long. I need to speak with you," I said, privately. Her tone sharpened immediately. "Are you all right?" "Not quite," I said. "I need your counsel." "Not at your house," she said at once. "Too many ears." We met at a quiet cafe near St. Augustine's. It was nearly empty, just two older gentlemen playing chess in the corner. I chose a window seat. Martha arrived 5 minutes later, gray coat, pearl earrings, sharp as ever. She sat down and folded her hands across the table. "Tell me everything." I did, from the party to the morning visit, all the way to what I'd overheard outside the office door. She listened without interruption, only nodding now and then. When I finished, she leaned back slowly, her expression unreadable. "They're not just being careless," I said softly. "They're trying to erase me." "They're moving fast," Martha said. "Faster than I expected. If they're already speaking to a doctor who's willing to file an incompetency declaration, then we have very little time." I wrapped my hands around the coffee cup, the ceramic heat grounding me. "I need to act before they do." "You'll need proof," she said. "Recordings documents anything that shows coercion or intent." Quietly, "You don't want them to know you're aware." "Not yet." I met her eyes. "I was hoping you'd say that." She nodded once. "This requires precision, Evelyn, not just strength." "I'm ready." "You'll need someone discreet. A private investigator. Someone who can gather what we need without drawing attention." I smiled faintly. "I might know someone." She smiled back. "Good. But remember, keep playing the part. Frail. Confused. Let them believe they're winning." "I've been underestimated my whole life," I said calmly. "I know how to wear that face." Martha reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. "Then let's make sure they never see it coming." 2 days later, I met Mr. Green at a hotel off the main road far enough from town to avoid any familiar eyes. He was exactly as Martha had described: quiet, direct, no unnecessary words. We sat in a corner booth tucked away from the other guests. I handed him the folder I'd prepared. Inside were bank statements, transfers, notes Lily had left on the kitchen counter, emails I'd printed and tucked away. "They want the house," I said. "They're prepared to do whatever it takes." Mr. Green flipped through the documents with steady hands. "It's common, unfortunately," he said. "Children see opportunity. Courts assume age means dependency. But if we have recordings, proof of intent that can shift everything." He reached into his coat and placed a small black device on the table. A voice recorder. "Legal in this state as long as one party consents. That party is you." I picked it up. Small, lightweight, ordinary. "Record anything relevant," he continued. "Conversations about their plans, the doctor finances. Keep your tone natural. Let them think you're confused or tired. The more at ease they are, the more they'll reveal." "And the doctor, I'll look into him," Mr. Green said. "Payments ties to Daniel Clinic activity. If he's dirty, we'll find it." I nodded. "What will it cost?" He offered a slight smile. "Martha already arranged most of it." I tucked the recorder into my purse. The weight of it felt heavier than it should have. But it wasn't fear. It was control. And by the time they realized what I'd done, it would be far too late. 3 days later, I invited them to dinner. No big announcement, no celebration. Just a quiet message sent through Lily's assistant, a home-cooked meal, casual, Comfortable? I picked their favorites: roast beef, honey-glazed carrots, fresh-baked rolls, still warm from the oven. I lit the candles in the dining room just before they arrived. Kept the chandelier dimmed low enough to soften the edges of everything. They came right on time. Brent carried a bottle of wine like it was some kind of peace offering. Lily wore a soft blue sweater, her hair pulled back just enough to look effortless. She kissed my cheek lightly and told me I looked well. I thanked her and smiled. We made small talk through the first course. Lily chatted about a charity luncheon she was planning. Brent mentioned a property deal he'd closed last week, the kind of surface talk that passes as polite when no one wants to be honest. I brought out the roast and filled their plates like I had so many times before. I poured the wine, offered extra rolls, asked about their weekend. All the while, the small voice recorder sat tucked beneath the runner at the center of the table, catching every syllable, every pause, every shift in tone. After dessert, Brent reached for his glass and leaned forward just slightly. "So, Mother," he said, "have you had a chance to think more about the transfer documents we discussed?" I folded my napkin slowly and set it in my lap. "Yes, dear, I have." He looked pleased. Lily's smile widened. "You've both been so thoughtful," I said, letting my voice soften. "It's overwhelming, really. I wouldn't even know where to begin with all those papers." Brent jumped in, already eager. "That's why we're here. We'll walk you through every part of it. You won't have to worry about a thing." Lily reached over and placed her hand on mine. "We just want you to enjoy your life, Mother, free from all these complications." I looked down and gave a small nod. "You're right. It's probably just a matter of time before I start forgetting little things like your father did." Brent's eyes lit up just barely, like he'd spotted the finish line. I touched Lily's arm gently. "But let's not rush. Your father always told me to review everything before signing anything, just to be thorough." His jaw tightened, but he kept the smile. "Of course," Brent said. "We'll have our attorney send over a preliminary draft, just to get started." "That's very kind," I said. We moved back into the sitting room after coffee. I packed up a small box of leftover pastries for them to take home. When they stepped out onto the front porch, I stood behind the door and watched them walk to the car. Brent had his arm around her waist. Lily laughed at something he said. They never looked back. That night, I placed the recorder on my desk and labeled the file. The next morning, the envelope arrived by courier. Thick, heavy, cream-colored paper with a law firm's name printed in raised ink across the top. One of Brent's contacts, no doubt. Inside, there were stacks of documents: property transfer forms, authorization letters, financial control agreements. Clean, clear, waiting only for my signature. Lily's name was already signed at the bottom. Brent's, too. They hadn't even waited for my answer. I picked up the phone and called Martha. She answered before the second ring. "It escalated," I said. Her voice didn't change. "Tell me." I described everything: the signatures, the courier, the blank line waiting for me. "They're assuming consent," I said. "They're preparing to file without it," she replied. I walked to the sunroom later that afternoon and opened all the windows. The breeze came in through the curtains, light and warm. I sat in my husband's old chair and opened his journals again. They were where I always kept them, bottom shelf, right side between the gardening books and the old ledgers from the business. His handwriting hadn't changed much, even near the end. Still steady, still clean. I turned to the pages marked from the year before he died. June 2nd. He'd written about the house, about Lily, about Brent. His words were cautious, measured. "I see the way Brent flatters her," he wrote, "always circling back to the house, the assets, the estate. I hope Evelyn is prepared." I read those lines more than once, then flipped ahead. December 4th. "If Evelyn ever faces them alone, I hope she remembers quiet does not mean weak." The sun shifted across the floor as I closed the journal and stood. They'd made a mistake. They thought they were dealing with someone too gentle to push back, someone softened by age, clouded by sentiment. But they'd forgotten whose name was still on the deed. 2 days later, Mr. Green called. His tone was calm but urgent. "We need to meet," he said. "There's something you'll want to see." We met again at the Carlton Hotel. Same corner booth, same background music humming from the wall speakers. He slid a folder across the table. I opened it slowly. Inside were pages of financial statements, real estate development reports, loan documents, Brent's business on paper. "They're in trouble, Mr. Green said. "Bad trouble. Brent overleveraged the Ridgeview project, borrowed from private lenders, missed several deadlines. If it collapses, they lose everything. House, cars, personal accounts." I flipped the pages, letting the numbers sink in. "And I'm the safety net," I said. "Yes," he said. "They need this house. It's the only stable asset they've got left. They've already been speaking to a developer. There's a buyer lined up. If they get your signature, or if they file a declaration of incompetence and gain control, they'll sell within a week." I set the folder down and folded my hands. "They're not protecting me," I said. "They're protecting themselves." He nodded. "Exactly." I leaned back in the booth and looked out the window. The trees were starting to turn just a hint of gold along the edges. "Let them keep pushing," I said quietly. "The more they press, the deeper they dig their own hole." "I'll keep recording," Mr. Green said, "and I've already started tracking Brent's communication with his lenders. The more desperate he gets, the more careless he'll become." We stood and left through separate doors. When I got home, the house was quiet. No footsteps. No questions. Just the familiar sound of wind moving through the branches outside the library window. For the first time in weeks, I slept straight through the night. The next part began with a signature. Not theirs, mine, but not on their papers. Martha met me at her office just after 9 the following morning. The building was quiet, the hallway still dim with early light. Her secretary greeted me with a nod and led me back to the corner room where the heavy oak desk still bore her name on the brass plaque, though she hadn't practiced full-time in years. She closed the door behind us, pulled the curtains, and turned the key in the lock. "The notary will arrive in 10 minutes, she said. "We'll be ready by then." The folder sat at the center of the desk, thick and carefully organized. She opened it, sliding the pages toward me one by one. "This is the Langley Family Irrevocable Trust," she said. "Once signed and notarized, all assets, real estate, financial holdings, personal investments will be held by the trust under your sole control as trustee." I read through the documents slowly, carefully. Each line had been drafted with precision. No room for interpretation, no loopholes that could be exploited later, no successor named, no clause for automatic transfer, nothing without my signature. When it's filed, she continued, no one, not Lily, not Brent, not even the courts, can override it without evidence of fraud or coercion. And with everything we've recorded, no one's going to believe that story. The notary arrived right on time. A quiet man in a gray suit with a leather briefcase and a calm voice. He took his place across from me, opened his own folder, and began to review the pages silently. Martha watched as I signed each line. Her hands were folded neatly in front of her, her face unreadable. When I reached the final signature, the notary handed me the pen. I wrote my name slowly, carefully, in the same looped script I'd used since college. Evelyn Margaret Hawthorne. The seal went on with a soft press and a click. The notary nodded and stood. "Everything is in order," he said. "You'll receive the certified copies by tomorrow morning." Martha placed the signed documents into a thick leather folder and snapped it shut. "It's done," she said. "The house, The grounds your financials completely untouchable. I let out a long breath and leaned back in the chair. The kind of breath you don't notice you've been holding until it's gone. They'll try again, I said. Of course, she replied. But this time they'll be walking into a wall. She stood and placed the folder in her briefcase, locking it with a key. You've played this better than most attorneys I've trained, she said quietly. It's not a game to me, I replied. It's my home. She nodded once. Now we wait. The moment they file for guardianship will expose everything. I left the office just before noon. The sky had turned a soft gray and the sidewalks were damp from an early morning drizzle. I walked the long way back to the car, taking my time, letting the quiet settle. Later that evening, I sat by the fireplace in the parlor, the same chair where I'd sat with Robert for years. I stared at the embers glowing behind the screen and thought of the portrait that still hung in the upstairs hall. His eyes had watched me make every hard decision in that house, and now, for the first time in a long while, I felt like I'd made one he would have understood. 3 nights passed before I sent the next invitation. I kept it simple. No desserts, no wine. Just a request. I'd like to review the documents together before signing. Please bring Brent. They arrived right on time, dressed for a victory lap. Lily wore a cream-colored blouse, her hair swept up at the sides. Brent carried a slim briefcase and gave a quick, confident nod as I opened the door. We met in the sitting room, just off the main hall. The fire was already lit, crackling gently behind the grate. I'd moved 2 chairs near the hearth, one for each of them. I sat on the couch across from them, a small side table between us. Mother Lily said with a smile, "You look lovely tonight." "Thank you," I said. "I thought we'd start with something simple." I reached into the drawer beside me and placed the black recorder on the table. Brent's eyes flicked toward it. Lily blinked once. I pressed play. Their voices filled the room. Crisp, unmistakable. "If we wait, we risk her finding other counsel," Brent's voice said. "Dr. Alden is willing to do the evaluation. Once she's deemed unfit, we gain full legal control." The silence that followed was complete. I let it play for another 10 seconds, then clicked it off. "I've been many things to you," I said quietly. "A mother, a support, a name on a deed. But not once have I been helpless." Lily shifted in her seat. Brent's jaw tightened. That conversation, she said quickly, was taken out of context. "It was recorded legally," I replied. "In my own home." Brent leaned forward. "You don't understand what we've been dealing with. This wasn't meant to hurt anyone." "No," I said. "It was meant to save you from your own mistakes. The Ridgeview project is collapsing. Your lenders are circling. You saw this house as your solution." Lily shook her head. "You don't know everything." "I know about the loans," I said. "The pending sale agreement, the developer. I know exactly what was at stake for you." They didn't speak. "As of last week, I continued this house, and everything tied to it is locked under an irrevocable trust. You have no claim, no access, no right to it." Brent stood suddenly, his voice rising. "You can't do that. You're not of sound mind." That was the entire point. "And yet here we are," I said. "Your entire plan recorded, documented, and reported." Lily's voice cracked. "Mother, please. We didn't mean to take anything. We were scared." "Brent said it was the only way?" "No, Lily," I said. "You believed I was too tired to fight. That's not fear. That's calculation." The room was still. Neither of them moved. Then I added the last piece. "I've filed everything with the authorities," I said. "The recordings, the financial trails, the forged signatures." Brent froze. Lily's face turned pale. The knock on the door came right on cue. 2 uniformed officers followed by a plainclothes detective. Calm, direct. They stepped into the room and addressed me by name, Mrs. Hawthorne. The detective said, "We're here regarding your complaint." I stood and gestured toward the chairs. "They're right here." Brent's face twisted. "You're having us arrested?" "Over this," the detective replied. "You're being detained for questioning under suspicion of fraud, elder exploitation, and conspiracy." Lily stood shakily, her voice trembling. "Mother, please don't do this. We didn't mean for it to go this far." She reached for my hand. I didn't pull away, but I didn't offer comfort either. "You made your choices," I said. The officers stepped forward. Brent resisted at first, but they moved swiftly. Lily cried as the cuffs clicked around her wrists. Outside, I could see the neighbors starting to gather. Lights turned on across the street. Curtains pulled back. The detective turned to me once more. "We'll stay in touch as the case moves forward." I nodded, and just like that, they were gone. I stepped back into the house and closed the door behind me. The echo of the latch settling into place was the only sound left. The next part wasn't about revenge. It was about peace. The house was quiet again after they left. The fire had burned low in the hearth, leaving only faint red embers beneath the iron grate. I stayed in the sitting room for a while, standing at the window, listening to the fading hum of the police cruisers as they rolled down the drive. Maria stepped into the hall, asked softly if I needed anything. I told her no, just the door locked behind them. The latch clicked gently. The silence that followed was different than the kind I'd grown used to. It wasn't empty. It wasn't heavy. It was just still. That night, I didn't sleep much. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and stared at the stack of letters I'd kept in the drawer for years. Notes from Robert Holiday, cards from neighbors long since moved away, Lily's childhood drawings folded neatly into mismatched envelopes. I thumbed through them one by one, not looking for anything, just letting my hands remember the weight of things that used to matter. Around 3 a.m, I finally turned off the lamp and went upstairs. By noon the next day, the phone started ringing. One reporter, then another. Martha called twice. Mr. Green left a message saying he was gathering the last of the financial records. The detective handling the case had questions about the paper trail leading to the forged deed. Each conversation was short, polite, clipped. There wasn't much left to say. Everything that needed to be done had already been set in motion. What surprised me most was the quiet after that. Lily didn't call. Brent didn't send any messages. Their attorney didn't try to reach out. It was as if they'd disappeared, entirely swallowed by the very thing they tried to create. I heard they were released pending further investigation, instructed not to contact me directly. And they didn't. For 2 days, I didn't leave the property. The neighbors kept their distance, though I saw the Whitakers walking slower than usual past the front gates. On the 3rd morning, a small bouquet arrived. No note. Pale lilies and white roses wrapped in plain brown paper. Maria brought it in and set it on the console table without a word. I didn't ask where it came from. I didn't have to. That afternoon, I walked the back gardens for the first time in weeks. The maple trees had begun to turn just a hint of red along the edges. The air smelled like wood and soil, and the gravel path crunched lightly beneath my shoes. I followed the loop Robert and I used to take after dinner, past the arbor through the side gate and around the back toward the greenhouse. A few of the panes were still cracked from last winter's storm, and I made a note to call the handyman before the cold came in again. I stood for a while beneath the shade of the last oak, the one Lily used to sit under with a book in her lap when she was 12. I could almost see her there again, legs crossed her back against the trunk hair tucked behind her ears. It was hard to hold that picture next to the woman who had sat across from me just days ago, waiting for my signature like it was owed to her. I didn't stay out long, just enough to remind myself that the land was still mine. The next morning, I met Martha again, this time at her home. She had laid everything out on her dining table: case notes, timelines, copies of the audio files, transaction records, email printouts. She walked me through the official response from the district attorney's office, the likely charges, the next procedural steps. "They'll likely push for a deal," she said. "Plead out reduced sentence probation if the court allows it." I nodded. "Will that be enough?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she lifted a folder from the far end of the table and opened it slowly. "This," she said, "is the final accounting from Mr. Green's team. Every wire transfer, every signature, every asset Brent tried to hide under alternate names. It's all here." I took the folder from her hands and sat down. The numbers didn't shock me. Neither did the names of the companies or the account summaries. What struck me most was how much time they must have spent preparing it all. All those years of pretending visits, smiles, birthday cards, all while moving the pieces behind closed doors. Martha sat across from me and folded her hands. "There's something else," she said. "A petition arrived at the courthouse late last night. It was filed by Brent's legal team. They're attempting to freeze the trust, claiming mental incompetence at the time of signing." My hands didn't move. "Do they have anything?" She shook her head. "No medical records, no evaluations, no testimony, just conjecture. Their last hope is to convince a judge you weren't of sound mind." "Let them try," I said quietly. "We'll respond," she said. "By the end of the week, they've already walked themselves into a corner." I closed the folder slowly and set it down beside my teacup. "Do I need to attend the hearing?" "Only if you want to," she said. "You've done everything right, everything by the book." I nodded again, then looked out her window toward the quiet street beyond the hedges. She placed her hand over mine and gave a gentle squeeze. "You've carried this with grace," she said. "I carried it alone," I replied. Her voice softened. "You don't have to anymore." We sat there a while longer, neither of us saying much. Just the hum of the afternoon around us and the slow creak of the front porch swing in the breeze. By the time I returned home, the last of the leaves had started falling from the tree outside the study window. I picked up Robert's journal again later that night. There were only a few pages left at the back. One dated entry, one scribbled line. "If they ever try to take what we built, don't beg. Don't plead. Show them who you are." I closed the book gently and placed it back on the shelf. They'd seen the version of me they expected. The next part would show them what they'd never planned for. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in early November. Cold rain had started falling before sunrise, the kind that drifted sideways no matter which way you held your umbrella. I arrived at the courthouse early, not because I was nervous, but because I wanted a moment alone in the hallway before the crowd filtered in. The courtroom itself was quiet when I stepped through the door. Wooden benches, polished railings, the smell of paper and damp wool coats. Martha met me at the front with 2 manila folders in hand. She gave me a brief nod and leaned in. "They're here," she whispered. "They're sitting in the hallway." I didn't ask if Lily looked at me. I didn't need to know. When the judge entered, everyone stood. His name was Judge Holloway. Early 60s, gray hair, sleeves a little too long for his jacket. He looked over his glasses as he read the file in front of him. "This hearing is to determine the legitimacy of a claim of mental incompetence," he said plainly. "Filed against Mrs. Evelyn Hawthorne by her daughter and son-in-law." Brent sat at the table beside their attorney, a man I didn't recognize. Lily sat quietly, eyes downcast, her hands folded in her lap. She wore a navy blouse, the same one I'd bought her years ago for her first job interview. It still fit. Martha rose first. She laid out the trust documents, the financial statements, and the timeline. She explained the sequence of conversations, the false urgency behind Brent's proposals, and the attempts to rush legal transfers under the guise of concern. She introduced the voice recordings which had already been reviewed by the court. Then she turned toward the bench and placed a single sheet of paper on the rail. "This is a signed statement from Dr. Evelyn Stanford," she said, "a licensed neuropsychologist who conducted a full cognitive assessment of Mrs. Hawthorne 10 days ago. The results were submitted with this hearing packet." Judge Holloway lifted the page and read silently. "Dr. Stanford has no affiliation with either party," Martha continued. "Her evaluation confirms that Mrs. Hawthorne is of entirely sound mind, with no impairments that would prevent her from understanding or managing her own affairs." The judge nodded once and set the page aside. Brent's attorney stood next. He spoke quickly, citing stress-age memory lapses. He referenced the signature on the trust filing as suspicious in its timing and suggested that Mrs. Hawthorne had shown emotional volatility in recent interactions. Was she volatile? The judge asked when she provided over a dozen legally obtained recordings that document your clients plotting to have her committed. The attorney faltered. "Your Honor." The tone of those recordings was speculative. "She was the target of a fraudulent medical declaration." The judge interrupted. "There's nothing speculative about that." The room quieted. After a moment, he turned toward me. "Mrs. Hawthorne, would you like to say anything before I rule?" I stood slowly and folded my hands at my waist. "Your Honor," I said, "I've lived in the same house for over 40 years. I've paid the bills. I've managed the grounds. I've cared for family neighbors, even strangers, when they needed a meal or a quiet place to sit. The trust wasn't filed in haste. It was filed in defense." He gave a small nod. "Thank you." He glanced down at the file again. "The court finds no evidence of mental incompetence. The petition is dismissed. Furthermore, the court will notify the district attorney's office of the existing elder exploitation complaint and recommends they proceed with review." The gavel tapped once. The hearing was over. I didn't look toward Lily or Brent as I walked past. I stepped out into the rain and opened my umbrella slowly. The sound of water on fabric was the only thing I could hear. Martha caught up to me at the corner. Her coat was already soaked at the hem. "Well," she said, "that went about as cleanly as we could have hoped." I nodded once. "What happens next, the DA will decide how to proceed. Could take weeks, could take months, but the house is secure. The trust holds." We walked in silence until we reached the parking lot. She offered to drive me back to the estate, but I declined. "I'd like a few minutes alone," I said. She understood. When I got home, the driveway was still damp. The trees were bare. The porch light had flickered on early with the gray sky overhead. Maria met me at the door with a towel in hand. "There's something waiting in the study," she said. "It came while you were gone." I stepped inside and set down my coat. A small package rested on the chair beneath the window. It was wrapped in brown paper tied with twine. No return address. I opened it slowly. Inside was a photograph. Lily maybe, age 10, riding a bay-colored pony. Robert's hand holding the reins. Her smile wide, her hair tangled from the wind. Beneath the photo, a note in Lily's handwriting. 5 words. "I don't know who I am." I sat down on the edge of the chair and let the rain continue tapping against the glass. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just held the photograph for a long time. The next morning, I placed it in the old photo album where it belonged. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was the start of something quieter. It started small. A brief on the county website. Then a 2-paragraph column in the Tuesday edition of the local paper, just beneath the obituaries and church announcements. DA to review allegations of elder exploitation. It didn't name names, but anyone familiar with town politics could read between the lines. By Thursday, it was being discussed at the Rotary luncheon. Someone mentioned it after choir rehearsal. By the end of the week, Margaret Connolly called to say her cousin at the clerk's office had overheard Brent's name mentioned in a closed-door session. That was the first ripple. The second came 2 weeks later, when Brent's private development firm was audited by the state. A quiet review of grant applications, rezoning exemptions, and 2 large payments filed through a shell entity that listed Lily's name in the secondary contact field. Martha sent me the official letter tucked in an envelope with a yellow sticky note clipped to the corner. This is the beginning. Lily had not returned my call. I left only one. Maria and I kept our routines. Breakfast at 7:30. Mail at 10. Porch light on by dusk. I'd begun walking the garden again. The frost had taken the hydrangeas, but the winter roses were beginning to push through. Then came the call from the district attorney's office. They were opening a formal investigation. The voice on the other end of the line was calm, clear. They would handle everything from here forward. I didn't need to appear in court again unless I chose to testify. I said I would. 2 weeks after that, I received a letter from Lily, handwritten, short. I know I failed you. I don't expect forgiveness. I just didn't know how to be anyone's daughter after Dad passed. Brent filled the space with certainty. I let him. There was no return address. I didn't write back. In mid-January, Martha forwarded me the official filing summary. Brent was being charged with multiple counts: fraud, forgery, attempted unlawful commitment, and conspiracy to exploit an elder. Lily was not being charged, though the DA's report included her name in the context of knowledge and passive compliance. It was not the justice I'd once imagined, but it was a start. 3 days later, I got another package, a small wooden box. Inside was the music box Robert had given Lily on her 5th birthday. She'd asked to keep it after he passed. I'd never seen it again until that morning. The note was brief. You kept the light on. I'm sorry it took me this long to find my way back. I placed the box on the bookshelf beside the photo albums. The night before Brent's arraignment, I sat at the old oak desk in the study and opened a fresh sheet of paper. I wrote down the full inventory of the trust. The house, the land, the antiques, the endowment for local food programs, the donation clause to the animal shelter in Robert's name. And at the bottom, I added one more line. In the event my daughter Lily Mae Hawthorne is ready to return, not as heir, but as kin, she may choose one photograph and one room to call her own. That is all. And that is enough. Maria came to the door as I was sealing the envelope. Will you go to the hearing? She asked softly. I shook my head. No, that's for the court to handle. My work is here. Outside, the wind had picked up. The first hard snow was coming. I poured tea and sat by the window, letting the silence settle around me. No more court dates, no more signatures. Just one house, one roof, and the years left ahead. The wind did come that night. It swept across the porch and rattled the windows, curling through the garden path like it was searching for something long buried. I watched it from the armchair with a wool blanket over my knees and a cup of chamomile cooling in my hands. I hadn't seen Lily in nearly 8 months. After the charges were filed and the press moved on, she returned to her job upstate, sent the music box, and then nothing more. I didn't chase her. I'd learned to let silence settle where it needed to. Spring came slowly. The daffodils pushed up first, then the tulips. I walked the garden every morning with Maria, pointing out which sections needed thinning, which blooms had surprised us. Brent's sentencing came and went. 5 years, no parole. Lily didn't testify. By early summer, I'd cleared the guest bedroom and started donating old linens. Martha came by with a fresh batch of court papers for my records, but we didn't talk about any of it. We just sat on the porch with slices of lemon cake and watched the neighbor's dog chase dandelion fluff. Then, in the middle of July, a pale blue sedan pulled into the gravel drive. Lily stepped out wearing jeans and a simple cotton shirt. No suitcase, no papers. Just a small potted fern in her hands and the kind of expression I hadn't seen on her face since she was a teenager, hesitant, hopeful, unsure where to begin. She stood on the porch for a moment looking at the door. "I was thinking," she said quietly, "maybe I could tend the west garden. The soil's good out there. It just needs some care." I opened the screen door and nodded once. "The tools are in the shed. You remember where?" We didn't hug, we didn't cry. We just walked into the kitchen and set the fern by the window. Later, she chose the photo of her father holding her hand at the county fair. That went in her room. We didn't speak much about the past, but I saw her each morning in the yard. She weeded, watered, trimmed the edges. And sometimes after dinner, we'd sit with Maria and listen to the wind shift through the oak trees like it had always belonged to us. I don't know what the future holds. I can't promise what kind of relationship Lily and I will have, but I know this: some things heal slowly in the quiet, with no grand gestures. Sometimes dignity comes not in being proven right, but in standing steady long enough for the truth to speak for itself. This house still stands. The garden still grows. And when the sun hits the window just right, I can almost hear Robert's whistle coming through the screen like it used to. If you've made it this far, thank you for sitting with me through it all. If any part of this reminded you of your own story, I hope it brought a little peace. Feel free to share your thoughts below, and if you'd like to hear more stories like this one, I'll be right here keeping the light on.